Welcome to the Codcast. I'm Bruce Moll of CommonWealth magazine, along with my colleague Michael Jonas. We're joined by Tom O'Brien, the founding partner and managing director of HYM Investment Group. Tom stopped by to give us an update on what's happening at Suffolk Downs, the horse track straddling Revere and East Boston that is being converted into a new mixed-use neighborhood consisting of 10,000 units of housing, along with new offices, new retail, a new hotel, and 40 acres of parkland. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Bruce. Good to be here. Thanks, Michael.
So give us a quick update on what's going on with your project, where you stand.
So we purchased the site in May of 2017, and we've been engaged in a 2-year process to try and seek the approvals and begin the development of the site. The site itself is about 161 acres, and the approvals will allow for about 16 million square feet of development, which for us, the most important part of that is about 40 acres of open space, as you said, and about 10,000 units of housing. So we hope to begin the project this year. We're excited.
This year, 2020, and then would be finished in phases over a long period of time?
Yeah, 16 million square feet is a lot for a project. Certainly for Boston, it's a very sizable project. So it will probably take us between 15 and 20 years to build it all out. But the first phase, we'd like to begin, as quickly as possible. We've already, for the first buildings that we've identified in right by Beachmont Station in Revere, we've already selected architects, and we're anxious to get going.
And how much of a problem is traffic going to be at this? This is what everybody in Boston talks about these days, congestion. Mm-hmm. And so you're building a neighborhood in phases, as you pointed out, but how big of a problem, and just for those who may not be familiar with the site, it's bracketed by 2 Blue Line stations.
Yes.
And I'm just sort of curious, though, is traffic one of the chief concerns as you go through the review process?
Well, you mentioned the key to the whole transaction for us, the key to the whole site, which is we actually have 2 Blue Line stations that are directly connected to our site, and that's perhaps the most important part of this for us. So we see this as what's called a transit-oriented development site. It's really a classic transit-oriented development site because we are so close and so connected to the Blue Line. And even more importantly, the Blue Line is a very unique line among all the different lines in the MBTA in that the Blue Line actually has capacity. If you're a red line rider, if you're an orange line rider, if you're a green line rider, you know that those trains are very full each morning. But the Blue Line today has actually a substantial amount of capacity, and even more importantly, the MBTA owns 14 Blue Line train sets today, but they only run 12 a day. So there's 2 more train sets that can be put into service, whenever the MBTA needs them. That's a very unusual. It's kind of a luxury for the other lines. There's no backup trains in the red line. There's no backup trains in the orange line, as an example. So our intention is to try and do everything we can to direct as many people as we can onto the Blue Line to get back and forth from the site. But we certainly acknowledge that people still like to drive, and so we'll make substantial transportation improvements along 1A and the whole that corridor along the North Shore. That's been an area that, frankly, hasn't been invested in very much by MassDOT for decades. So we'll do a lot of that work ourselves. We've committed, actually, the overall infrastructure budget for us for the entire site is about $337 million. And a significant portion of that will be spent on roadways and Blue Line improvements and things like that.
I've read some of the discussion around traffic mitigation or improvements along 1A, and as in many cases, there's always this question about whether the improvements help with traffic flow or do they kind of induce more demand. Mm-hmm. And I know there's been some concerns about, how much more can you kind of, how many more cars can you cram onto 1A, and this kind of relates to a question that happens with a lot of development, and that is like how many parking spaces do you allot per unit, and can you sort of shape the direction of the development, by setting a lower number and sort of create, more transit, focus. At a certain point, I guess you're going to kind of go against what the market wants, and it becomes not feasible to go lower in terms of how much you restrict parking. I mean, that's the new watchword in urban development and transit-oriented development. How do you sort of wrestle with that and deal with this question about how much parking to provide and the concerns people have that if you add more spaces, you're going to get more cars there?
Mm-hmm. For us, we really don't want to overbuild the parking. Parking is actually not a very good business. Building new parking is very expensive, and the revenue from parking doesn't really cover the cost of building new garages. So our preference is to build much less parking than we otherwise might. But as you point out, Michael, you still need to build a basic number of spaces in order to be competitive in the marketplace because people still like their car. There's two big drivers on a mixed-use site like this. First is the condominiums that you build. So we'll build rental units and we'll build condominiums. And 10% of our units are all units, by the way, 10% of our units will be dedicated to senior housing as well. So that actually helps us a bit on the transportation and the parking, but it also helps us build a true mixed-use community. So, but what drives it, though, is the condominium owners have a very high expectation that there'll be at least one space per unit for the condominium owners. But for the rental units, what we can typically do is build less than one space per unit because the rental units, oftentimes people will not own a car. And there's lots of good opportunities for people if they need a car. They can rent a car, they can Uber, they can, whatever they need to do from that perspective. And we certainly, as I said earlier, want them on the blue line. But acknowledging that you need to have some spaces there. The other piece of that is the big driver is if we can select or find a commercial office tenant or life science tenant. Those office tenants typically have a certain requirement for parking, and that's usually a function of per 1,000 square feet of space. So we'll be less than a space per 1,000 square feet of space. But to be competitive, to get that company, we're going to have a certain level of parking associated with that. But we want to build as little parking as we possibly can on the site because it's as I said, it's not a good investment, and frankly, it defeats the purpose that we originally purchased this, which is to encourage more and more people to be on transit. That's our key goal.
You've been calling it the site, and I called it Suffolk Downs. What are you calling them? When people move in, what are they going to call this neighborhood? Have you thought about that?
It's so big. It's 161 acres. So for us, we've looked at it from a variety of different perspectives. The section that's in Revere is at Beachmont Station, and that neighborhood is called Beachmont. And Beachmont is a terrific neighborhood in Revere, filled with a lot of great families, a lot of great history that's been there, terrific commitment to schools, obviously a beautiful beach in Revere as well. So that neighborhood clearly kind of calls out as Beachmont because that's sort of the existing name. And then at the other end, we think, frankly, we'll continue to call the entire site Suffolk Downs just because it's a very recognizable name. So why drop that or why change that? But we do also acknowledge that at the Suffolk Downs T Station, there's an opportunity to kind of create a new plaza or perhaps a new section there. So we've started to call that Belle Isle Square as a function of Belle Isle Marsh, which is a beautiful marsh right across the way on the other side of Bennington Street. So we think that kind of makes sense as a name. So there'll be at least three names, we think. The section that is the bulk of it would be Suffolk Downs. Then we've got Beachmont and Belle Isle Square. So seems to be catching on, at least for now.
And Tom, I've read that this is, as far as the Boston development review process goes, maybe the largest project they've dealt with ever. The size of it and the scope. So there's not really exactly a model for it. In some ways, maybe you'll be setting the model. The closest thing that people talk about is what's happened in the Seaport, and as you well know, a lot of the reviews of how the planning proceeded are not altogether favorable. What lessons do you take from the Seaport, and what do you say to people who worry about sort of another version of that unfolding there, that people are going to look back and say, oh, we blew a chance to really do this right?
I think, first and foremost, from the process perspective, we've really embraced community engagement during this process. So over 2 years, our team went back through my schedule just to kind of look through what we've done. And we figured I've done 461 different meetings across 2 years. So we've really embraced community engagement and really worked very hard to make this a really strong process. I think, that would really be widely acknowledged. We've also done a lot to try and bring groups that have traditionally been underrepresented in those processes. So we've done a tremendous amount to translate all of our publicly filed documents into Spanish. We've been on Spanish language television and radio. We've held Spanish language only meetings. We've done dozens and dozens of that work. So really for us, what it begins with is is that process of engaging with people and helping them feel comfortable about it. But then there's a couple of other watchwords that I would say through that. First is we signed a project labor agreement. So, for us, that kind of comes back to if you want the place to be something different, if you want it to be more grounded in Boston, and if you want it to be a place that is welcoming to all, then you should build it from the get-go in a way that involves a variety of opportunity, particularly for women and people of color who may not have had opportunities to be part of the building trades. So we signed a project labor agreement, and the building trades really shared these goals with us in terms of increasing participation among women and people of color in the trades. And so we really want to make sure that we build this from the beginning with people from East Boston, people from Revere, and women and people of color who may not have been as well represented in the past in the building trade. So that's a key part. Second part is, we dedicated 25% of this site to open space. And so that's a significant chunk that yields 40 acres of open space, and it helps create a place that we think is very public. And we're designing and thinking about the entire site with the open space in mind from the first. So rather than perhaps in the Seaport where the open space was kind of an add-on or something that was pushed onto a developer as something that maybe the developer didn't want to do, we're embracing it from the beginning. And so that's a key piece for us. 40 acres of open space, well-designed, very public, very, very open. We've also made a series of other commitments. We're going to have 10% of our retail will be with local retailers. That's a key piece for us that ends up, particularly with regard to East Boston, Revere, a lot of Latino-owned businesses, can find their way onto our site, which we're really excited about. We want the retail to be very local and something that really is much more recognizable as truly Boston. There's a variety of different ways that we've tried to approach this to make this a very welcoming place. I would also add, too, from an affordable housing perspective, our approach is very different than what's happened in the Seaport. In the Seaport, a lot of the affordable units were kind of built off-site elsewhere. So which ended up in the Seaport was, there's maybe 7% or so of the total housing stock is affordable. We're going to build all of our affordable units on site at Suffolk Downs. That's a key hallmark of who we are as a company. All the different projects that we've done to date have always involved that. And in addition to that, we're going to have 10,000 units of housing on a site that is smaller than the Seaport. So the Seaport's maybe 200 to 300 acres. There's only about 6,000 units total of housing there. We're going to have 10,000 units on 161 acres. So we really want this to be a community. We want this to be a mix of people with seniors and affordables and open space and all that. So we're starting from the get-go to try and take this in a different direction.
On the percent on the units themselves, I think you've mentioned earlier 10% will be going for elderly people?
Yeah, 10% of all units, market, and affordable will be seniors, yes.
And then how much will be affordable? Or
13% of all the units built on site will be, in the Boston side, will be affordable. Then we've also committed, we've been working with the mayor and other elected officials, Councilor Edwards and other folks, to increase the total number of affordable units to 20%. So we'll build 13% of our total units, so that's about 930 units will be built on site. This is the most affordable units that have ever been built by any project in Boston. And then we'll do another 500 units to a total of 1,430 units. And those 500 units will be produced with a fund, kind of a housing stabilization fund, that will allow the city and local nonprofits to purchase and preserve as affordable housing units in East Boston as well. So we'll end up producing 20% affordability across the site.
So, and then with the balance of the units, do you then have to, I'm just sort of seeing a lot of these luxury towers going up all around Boston. Will your high end go way up in the stratosphere like a lot of these places we're seeing?
I mean, we're certainly not the Back Bay or the more expensive parts of Boston. So we don't see us as the high end luxury. I mean, honestly, we see this site as kind of more of a moderate income site. That's sort of where we are. I mean, we're on the furthest end of East Boston, and we're partly in Revere. So we're definitely not the Back Bay. That's not what we see. I would say, I mean, the key thing to understand on the housing market is, it's very costly to build these buildings. We're building a building in downtown Boston right now, and the cost of that is $675,000 per unit to build that tower. So it has become very expensive to build housing in Boston, and that's a big issue, really big issue. But what we're trying to do here, with the combination of the project labor's agreement that we've put together with our approach in terms of how we've designed these buildings and what we've thought about, we're trying to deliver these units at less cost than downtown. So we'll probably be 40% less cost at our site than downtown.
$675,000 to build a unit downtown.
Yes.
And is that a luxury unit, or
that's not even today's price? Because remember,
You started that
2 years ago,
right?
So we locked in those prices 2.5 years ago. So today's price is higher. It's a big issue for us in the city right now. I mean, I know that people are anxious because housing costs so much. If you're a renter, you're being asked to pay more and more of your income to pay rent. But the problem right now is it's very expensive to build these units. Right now, this may be a little shocking for you guys, but from our company's perspective, new high-rise rental housing in Boston does not pencil out, doesn't underwrite. It's become so expensive. So it's really hard to see where the housing production process is going to go from here.
Wow. So, and why? Spend a little time talking about why that is. Why is it so expensive? Is it just labor costs? Is it materials? What is it?
It's not only labor costs. I mean, it's labor plays a piece in it, but it's also materials costs and land cost. Land cost has come way up. Right now, from our perspective, the only way to kind of make rental housing work, and remember, in the housing market, if you're going to build a large building, you can either build a condominium building or you can build a rental housing building. And rental is actually relatively easier to finance because there are institutional lenders and institutional investors who will invest in that. So pension funds and life insurance companies and people like that will do that. If you want to build a condo building, that same group of investors won't participate in that because that's not a business that they want to be in. And so condos are very difficult to finance. But for rental housing, which has been more of the product that has been produced, the big challenge is land price has gone up, construction costs have gone up, and as a result of that, the only way to make it work is if you combine it within a mixed-use project that has a commercial and life science component. And the commercial and life science market is so strong right now that you essentially take some of the value from that commercial or life science building and use that to subsidize the cost of building the residential building. If you don't have that mixed use, if it's just a one-off residential building, it will not underwrite.
Yet at the same time, Tom, I mean, all we keep hearing is that the solution to our housing affordability problem is production. So it seems like we're in a little bit of a tough bind with that's the way out, but you're saying it's become increasingly difficult to do that.
That's exactly the point. I mean, that's exactly our point. One of the most important statistics that I've focused on in the last 6 months or so is over the last 5 years, we created about 300,000 jobs in the corridor kind of inside of Route 128, right? So for us as a region, that's a good number, 300,000 new jobs, inside of 128. During that same period of time, we only created 110,000 new units of housing. And that same dynamic, producing more jobs and housing units, has existed for decades here. So we've been underbuilding our housing supply for decades and decades and decades. But you're exactly right. That's kind of why I'm raising this alarm bell. This is a big issue. As much as people say, okay, we need to do more to build more affordable housing, the issue, and you guys know it as well as anybody, the federal government, beginning in the 1980s, get out of the business of creating affordable housing. Even for a period in the 90s when Bill Clinton was president and when President Obama was in office and HUD was more fully funded, and we were able to get some projects done that were really great. Mission Main was redone, Maverick Square was redone. There were a few projects like that were redone. Those were all good things. But today, if you look at Congress, I mean, there's no way that Congress in its broken state is going to fully fund HUD. So the federal government's out of that business. The state government only has so much in the way of resources to invest in housing, and the city government only has so much in the way of, what the mayor did last week in terms of trying to bring new resources to housing was awesome. It was really great and very much needed. But we all need to understand, we need to have a really frank conversation. It's very expensive to build housing, and we need to build more of it at all levels. It's not just affordable. It's not just that we need housing for people who are in the, say 70% of the area median income range. We need it for people who are teachers and firefighters, and we're not building enough housing. We have to do more of it. It's a huge crisis for us right now.
And yet there seems to be a lot of pushback both in a lot of communities to building more housing. Is that sort of, I've got mine, let's not add more? And I know I have a lot of friends who drive along various roads and they're like, wow, they're building housing right up to the sidewalk's edge, and there's no room for anything else. What's going on here? Is that the pushback that you encounter?
I think there is some of that, because we are a very tight, region, and so if you think about Boston, Boston, there's not a whole lot of sites, and so it becomes more and more incumbent on people to try and look at ways where you can squeeze in housing to make it work, and there might be some spaces where you wouldn't have thought it would work, but somehow you can squeeze it in. But I'm just raising the alarm bell. We can't keep going. There's a reason. If you guys report on these things, there's a bunch of other real estate people who have, in the last year or so, taken projects that were approved for housing, and they've gone back and asked for the approval to convert those housing projects into commercial and life science projects. There's a reason for that, because the housing projects don't underwrite. So now we're making our problem worse. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to create more office buildings, more life science companies that will house more jobs, but we're not building enough housing to house the people who are going to take those jobs.
Vicious cycle.
Yeah. It's a big issue, and I think the mayor clearly understands it. I know the number of the elected officials in Boston understand. So I think people get this, but I think the broader public really needs to understand. We need to build more housing, and we need to build it at all levels. A lot of it.
So a lot of people may not know you personally that are listening to this, Tom, and tell us a little bit about yourself. And I'm particularly interested. You have two brothers, both in interesting jobs, both with a history around here, and I know you may not be a total Patriots fan, as from what I understand. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I have an older brother, John, who we grew up here. Our family, my mom and dad are retired and live on the Cape. Ann and John O'Brien, who were amazing parents for us. My older brother, John, was a state senator, served in the state senate here in the 90s, and now is a senior executive with a utility company based in Washington, D.C. My younger brother, Bill, who's perhaps the most famous of us, is a football coach. He's the head coach of the Houston Texans. It's funny, when we go to Texans versus Patriots games, we're all in the stands, the people will look at us and say, well, are you guys from Houston? No, we're from Boston. The head coach of the Houston Texans went to St. John's Prep and grew up here in Boston, and so we're more Boston than many of the players on the Patriots, I guess. So we were in Kansas City last week, and unfortunately the Texans looked like they had it going for the first quarter, and it didn't work out the way we wanted it. But we're really excited for Bill. So he's back at it again next year, and all excited. And then I'm. I've been here in Boston all my life. I was the director of the Boston Redevelopment Authority in the 90s. Been working in a variety of different capacities for different companies over the last 20 years or so. We started HYM about 10 years ago. It's a really great company. We've built a team that is 50% women and 30% people of color. We work on some of the larger, more complicated projects in town. My wife and I, Patricia also had wonderful parents. My wife and I, Patricia, have 5 kids. All our kids are adopted. They were all born in different countries. So we have a young man who's 24 years old who's from Bogota, Colombia, 2 girls from Guatemala, and a boy from Ecuador, and a little girl from Ethiopia. So that's us.
And does HYM, what does that stand for?
So nobody ever asked me this question. So we our 4th child, her name was Marisol. She was from Guatemala, and when she first came home, she was a perfectly healthy child, very active, beautiful kid. But by the age of 3, she had it was clear she had a neurological disorder that was undiagnosed. And the neurological disorder caused her to lose her ability to walk, lose her ability to swallow. So she ended up being a child who was fed by a feeding tube and lived in was in a wheelchair and required, round-the-clock care. My wife was an amazing caregiver for her. So she died on December 20th, 2008, and just at the time we were starting this company. So when I was starting the company, I had a different name for the company, and I went to my wife. This is after Marisol had died, and I said, here's what I'm thinking. And she looked at me and she said, it doesn't sound very personal. It doesn't sound you. Why don't you think about it, pray about it, and go back and come back. So Marisol, before she died and before she got sick, as her words started to get scrambled up, she would look at me and she would say, hold you me, Daddy. And so HYM stands for Hold You Me, thinking about Marisol. And she's been a great guiding force in our company all the way through over 10 years.
That's quite a story.
So
That's quite a story.
you didn't expect that answer, I'm sure. So
No, I was thinking
nobody
it's
ever asked me that
abbreviations for something.
Exactly. Everybody thinks it's like some name or some, whatever, but it's very personal to us. It's really, and it's been an amazing, again, Marisol, I talk to Marisol just about every day. I pray to her, and it's really a great guiding force in my life.
Well, Tom, thanks very much for joining us today on the Codcast. And to my colleague, Michael Jonas, I'm signing off. We'll see you next week. Thank you.